What if the real reason you feel alone is not because people don't like you, but because you are becoming someone most people cannot understand? Think about that for a second. What if the silence around you is not rejection, but transformation? Most people are terrified of being alone. They think having no friends means something is wrong with them. They believe popularity equals value. They chase approval. They adjust their personality. They laugh at jokes they don't like. They say yes when they want to say no, all just to avoid that uncomfortable feeling of standing alone. But here's the truth no one talks about. Some of the strongest people in the world have gone through long seasons with no friends, not because they were unlikable, but because they were evolving. When a person starts thinking differently, acting differently, dreaming bigger, the old circle often disappears. Suddenly the conversations that once felt normal begin to feel empty. The habits that once felt exciting start to feel meaningless. And the people who once surrounded you slowly drift away. At first it hurts. You start questioning yourself. Did I change too much? Did I do something wrong? Why does it feel like everyone else belongs somewhere except me? But here is the part most people misunderstand. Growth is lonely. Real growth separates you from environments that were never meant to support your future. When you begin to value your time, you stop wasting hours in pointless conversations. When you start respecting yourself, you stop tolerating disrespect. When your vision becomes bigger, small thinking becomes exhausting to listen to. And suddenly you look around and the room is empty. No calls, no invitations, no messages, just silence. And that silence can feel terrifying if you don't understand what it means. But the most dangerous mistake you can make in that moment is rushing to fill the silence with the wrong people. Because most people would rather be surrounded by the wrong crowd than face the courage of standing alone. They go back to environments that shrink them. They reconnect with people who gossip, complain, and criticize dreams. Why? Because loneliness feels uncomfortable. But what if loneliness is not punishment? What if it is preparation? Think about the greatest thinkers, creators, and leaders in history. Almost every one of them experienced periods where they walked alone. Moments where their ideas were misunderstood. Moments where people doubted them. Moments where their path separated from the crowd. Because becoming different always creates distance. The question is not whether you feel alone. The real question is this: are you alone because you lost your way, or are you alone because you finally found it? Most people believe that having many friends means you are doing something right in life. But let me ask you something honestly. If you removed the parties, the distractions, the shared routines, the convenience, how many of those people would still be there when your life becomes difficult? Because real connection is rare. And the truth is, many people are surrounded by friends but still feel completely alone. Why? Because being around people is not the same as being understood. You can sit in a room full of people laughing, talking, celebrating, and still feel like nobody actually sees you. Nobody knows what you are thinking. Nobody understands what you are trying to build. So you start shrinking yourself. You stop talking about your ideas because people look confused. You stop sharing your goals because people laugh. You stop speaking about your vision because someone always says, "Be realistic." Slowly you become quiet. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you realize most people are not ready to hear it. And that moment changes everything. Because the moment you stop performing for approval, many people lose interest in you. Think about that. When you no longer entertain negativity, the negative people disappear. When you stop participating in gossip, the gossip circles close. When you stop wasting nights chasing meaningless validation, the crowd moves on without you. At first, this feels painful. It feels like rejection. But look deeper. It is actually filtration. Life is quietly removing the people who were only connected to the version of you that stayed small. You see, many relationships are built on comfort, not growth. They exist because everyone agrees to stay the same. Nobody challenges each other. Nobody grows too much. Nobody dreams too big. Because the moment one person begins evolving, the balance breaks. The conversations change, the priorities shift, and suddenly you realize something uncomfortable. Some friendships only work because you were all avoiding your potential together. You were bonded by distraction, bonded by complaining, bonded by escaping responsibility. But the moment you start building something meaningful, many of those bonds dissolve. Not because you hate those people, not because they are bad, but because your direction changed. Imagine trying to climb a mountain while everyone around you wants to stay in the valley. They will not understand your effort. They will question your decisions. They might even try to convince you to come back down. And if you keep climbing, eventually the distance becomes too large. Now, here's the difficult part most people struggle to accept. Outgrowing people is painful. Because even when you know it is necessary, part of you still misses the comfort of how things used to be. The laughter, the familiarity, the feeling of belonging. But growth asks a difficult question. Do you want comfort or do you want your future? Because sometimes the price of becoming who you are meant to be is leaving behind the version of yourself that needed the crowd. Let me tell you something most people never realize until much later in life. Loneliness is not always the absence of people. Sometimes loneliness is the distance between who you are becoming and who everyone else expects you to remain. And that distance can grow quietly. At first, it starts small. You begin questioning things other people never question. You start thinking about your future while others are focused only on the weekend. You start valuing your time, your energy, your peace. But the people around you are still living the same routine. Same conversations, same complaints, same excuses. And slowly you begin to notice something strange. The things that once entertained you no longer excite you. The jokes feel empty. The gossip feels exhausting. The endless talk about other people's lives feels meaningless. So you start pulling back, not loudly, just quietly. You speak less. You observe more. And that is when people start saying things like, "You've changed." But what they really mean is something deeper. They mean you are no longer behaving in a way that keeps them comfortable. Because when one person begins to grow, it forces everyone else to confront a difficult truth about their own lives. Growth creates mirrors. Your discipline reminds someone of their laziness. Your ambition reminds someone of their fear. Your focus reminds someone of the time they are wasting. And instead of facing those reflections, many people choose a simpler solution. They distance themselves from the mirror, which means they distance themselves from you. Now, if you don't understand this process, it can feel incredibly personal. You start thinking maybe you became boring, maybe you became too serious, maybe people just don't enjoy being around you anymore. But that interpretation is often wrong. What is actually happening is alignment. Your life is slowly reorganizing itself around the person you are becoming. The old environments begin fading. The old conversations lose meaning. The old friendships that depended on comfort struggle to survive in a life that now demands purpose. And here is where most people make a critical mistake. They panic. They rush to rebuild the same circle they just outgrew. They go back to the same distractions, the same habits, the same people who kept them from evolving in the first place. Why? Because silence feels uncomfortable. But what if that silence is not empty? What if that silence is space? Space to think clearly, space to discover what actually matters to you, space to build a life based on intention instead of approval. You see, when the noise disappears, something powerful happens. You begin hearing your own thoughts again. And for many people, that is the first time in their life they truly ask themselves one honest question. Who am I becoming when nobody else is watching? There is a moment in every person's life when the noise finally disappears. No crowd, no constant messages. No one telling you what you should do, what you should think, or who you should become. Just you in the quiet. And for many people, that moment feels terrifying because silence has a strange power. When everything becomes quiet, you can no longer escape yourself. There are no distractions to hide behind. No conversations to fill the space. No approval to chase. Just your thoughts, your doubts, your questions. And that is exactly why most people try to avoid being alone. They fill every moment with noise, scrolling endlessly, talking endlessly, running from one distraction to another. Because the moment they sit quietly with themselves, uncomfortable truths start appearing, questions they have been avoiding for years. Am I actually happy with my life? Am I moving in the right direction? Or am I just following a path that everyone else expects me to follow? But when you spend enough time alone, something remarkable begins to happen. At first, the silence feels heavy. You feel disconnected. You feel uncertain. You wonder if something is wrong with you. But slowly, the silence becomes clarity. You begin noticing patterns you never saw before. You realize how many of your decisions were influenced by other people's opinions. You realize how often you adjusted your personality just to fit in. How many times you said yes when your mind was screaming no. And that realization can be uncomfortable because suddenly you see how much of your life was built around pleasing others instead of understanding yourself. But this is where transformation begins. When you stop performing for the world, you finally begin discovering who you actually are. You start identifying what truly matters to you, not what impresses people, not what gains approval, but what gives your life meaning. And here is the strange part. The more comfortable you become with your own company, the less desperate you become for everyone else's presence. You stop chasing people. You stop forcing conversations. You stop trying to convince others to stay in your life. Instead, something inside you becomes calm, grounded, confident. Because you realize you are not incomplete just because you are alone. You realize something powerful. Your value does not come from how many people surround you. Your value comes from the direction you are moving in. And once you understand that, loneliness begins to transform into something different. It becomes independence, it becomes strength. It becomes the quiet foundation where you begin building a life that is truly yours. But there is another truth most people discover during this stage. Being comfortable alone does not mean you will stay alone forever. It means you are finally strong enough to wait for the right people instead of settling for the wrong ones. There is something powerful that happens when you stop chasing people. Your entire life begins to change. Because when you stop chasing, you start choosing. And those two things are completely different. Most people spend their lives chasing acceptance. They chase attention, validation, approval. They adjust their behavior just to keep people around. They say things they don't believe, laugh at things they don't find funny, and tolerate treatment they know they don't deserve. Why? Because they are afraid of losing people. But the moment you learn to be comfortable alone, that fear begins to disappear. Suddenly you realize something most people never understand. Not everyone deserves access to your time, your energy, and your life. And that realization changes the way you see relationships. Instead of asking, how can I make them like me? You begin asking a more important question. Do they deserve to be in my life? Think about that shift. For years, many people focus on earning a place in other people's circles. They work hard to prove they're interesting enough, fun enough, successful enough, valuable enough. But very few people stop and evaluate the other side. Are these people supportive? Do they respect your goals? Do they celebrate your growth? Or do they feel uncomfortable when you succeed? Because the truth is, many people enjoy your company only when you are not growing beyond them. They are comfortable when you stay at the same level. The moment your ambition becomes bigger, your discipline becomes stronger, or your vision becomes clearer, something changes. The dynamic shifts. Sometimes they become distant. Sometimes they become critical. Sometimes they quietly disappear. And that can feel painful if you believe friendship means everyone stays forever. But real life does not work that way. Some people enter your life for a season. Some people walk with you through a specific chapter. And some people are only meant to meet the old version of you. When that version of you changes, the connection naturally fades. That is not failure. That is evolution. Think of it like climbing a mountain. At the bottom, the path is crowded. Many people start the climb. The energy is exciting, the conversations are loud, and everyone feels motivated. But as the path becomes steeper, fewer people continue. Some stop because it becomes difficult. Some stop because the view no longer matters enough to them. Some simply lose interest. And if you keep climbing, something surprising happens. You begin noticing the path becoming quieter, less crowded, more focused. The people who remain are not there by accident. They are there because they chose the same difficult path. They understand the effort. They respect the journey. And those connections are completely different from the casual friendships formed at the bottom. Because when two people meet near the top of the mountain, they both know something important. Neither of them climbed there by chasing the crowd. Here's the truth most people never admit out loud: being alone is not a curse, it's a signal. It's a signal that your life is evolving faster than the environment around you. And that can feel terrifying because suddenly you realize the people you thought were your closest allies aren't keeping pace with your growth. At first, that realization hits like a shockwave. You start replaying old memories. You think about all the times you laughed together, all the promises you made to each other, and suddenly it feels heavy, like you've lost something precious. And that's exactly the point where most people make a critical mistake. They chase the old circle, they beg for approval, they try to recreate the past. They call text compromise anything to feel that sense of belonging again. But the truth is, no one can go back to being the person you were when those friendships formed. You can't shrink yourself to fit someone else's comfort anymore. Because growth always demands space. And space separates you from those who cannot or will not grow with you. Think about it like this: your life is like a garden. If you keep watering old weeds just because they were there first, the flowers you are trying to grow will never bloom. You must be willing to let go of what no longer serves you, no matter how familiar, no matter how comfortable. And here's the paradox: letting go is not about losing people. It's about finding yourself. It's about creating room for relationships that inspire, challenge, and elevate you. Because life is not meant to be filled with people who dim your light to feel comfortable. It's meant to surround you with those who encourage your growth, even when it makes them uncomfortable. And that is a hard lesson for most people. They confuse quantity with quality. They mistake familiarity for loyalty. They cling to the past because it feels safe. But here's what you need to understand: the right people will never make you feel like you're too much. They will never ask you to shrink. They will not disappear when you start evolving. They will show up. They will respect your journey. They will match your ambition. And that is why the loneliness you feel now is actually your life's greatest gift. It's not punishment. It's preparation. It's the quiet stage where you separate the noise from the signal, the filler from the essential, the crowd from the tribe. And if you embrace that, you will not only survive the solitude, you will thrive because of it. Here's something most people never realize until they hit a turning point: loneliness is not the enemy. It's a test. It tests your patience, your discipline, your courage, and your clarity. Because when everyone else drifts away, when invitations stop, when messages go unanswered, you are left with one thing: yourself. And yourself is where the real work begins. Most people fear that moment. They panic, they fill it with noise, distractions, meaningless interactions. They try to make the emptiness disappear. But the people who change the world, those who achieve something extraordinary, learn to sit in the silence and listen. They begin asking the questions no one else has the courage to ask. What do I really want? What am I willing to sacrifice for it? Who do I really need around me to grow? Because growth is selective. It is not about popularity. It is not about approval. It is about alignment. And alignment often requires walking away from the majority. The friends who laughed at your small dreams are not always the ones who will cheer your big ones. The people who thrived in comfort zones are rarely the ones who will celebrate your discomfort, the hard work, the risk, the sacrifices necessary to become extraordinary. So loneliness becomes a filter that separates those who are there for the right reasons from those who are only there for convenience. And that filter is uncomfortable because it leaves gaps in your social circle, gaps in your comfort, gaps in your expectations. But those gaps are exactly what you need. Because in those gaps, you find clarity. You begin to understand your values. You begin to understand your priorities. You begin to understand the type of people who truly deserve a place in your life. And here's the part most people never see coming: the longer you spend alone, the stronger your judgment becomes. You no longer settle for shallow friendships. You no longer chase approval. You no longer waste time on people who drain you. You become selective. You become intentional. And that is when real transformation begins. The solitude you once feared becomes a source of power. The silence you once hated becomes your greatest teacher. And the absence of friends you once mourned becomes a signal your life is making room for the right people, the right opportunities, and the right version of yourself. Because true growth is never crowded. It is deliberate, focused, and often lonely. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner you stop fearing loneliness and start embracing it as the crucible that shapes greatness. There is a stage in life when being alone stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like power. Because in that silence, something incredible happens. Your mind becomes clear, your focus sharpens, and your purpose comes into view. Most people never reach this stage because they are terrified of the quiet. They fill every moment with noise, scrolling, talking, distracting themselves, anything to avoid looking inward. But if you can sit in the silence, something extraordinary begins to unfold. You start recognizing patterns in your life that were invisible when the crowd was around. You notice how much energy you wasted on people who didn't matter, conversations that had no meaning, and approval that was never genuine. You see the subtle ways you shrank yourself to fit in, the compromises you made just to feel accepted, the dreams you postponed because someone told you they were too big. And then comes the hardest part, understanding that growth demands space. Some people will not grow with you. Some friendships cannot survive the evolution of your life. Some people were only meant to meet the old version of you. And when that version changes, the connection fades. At first, that feels painful. You remember the laughter, the comfort, the familiarity, and a part of you wants to go back, to shrink, to be the same person you were so that everyone else feels comfortable again. But growth asks the question, comfort or future. Do you want the temporary warmth of old relationships or the lasting fulfillment of becoming who you were meant to be? The choice is never easy because growth separates, it filters, it demands that you become comfortable with the uncomfortable. And yet once you embrace it, the loneliness becomes purposeful. It teaches you clarity, it teaches you discernment, it teaches you patience. You begin to understand which people belong in your life, not by chance but by alignment, not by habit but by intention. The crowd fades, the noise disappears, and only those who truly resonate with your vision remain. And here's the remarkable truth. Those who stay are not just friends, they are allies, they are supporters. They are people who will celebrate your growth instead of fearing it. Because the stronger you become alone, the more you attract the right people. The solitude that once felt like emptiness becomes the foundation for authentic connection. It becomes the place where your values are tested, your boundaries are defined, and your life begins to align with your true purpose. And when that alignment happens, you realize something powerful. Being alone is not your weakness. It is your preparation for greatness. Here's the thing most people never realize. Being alone is not a punishment. It's a signal that your life is leveling up. It signals that your path is no longer compatible with the people who once surrounded you. That your thoughts, ambitions, and values have grown faster than the environment you were in. And that can feel terrifying. You start noticing the silence, the missed calls, the vanished invitations, the conversations that no longer hold meaning. At first, it feels like rejection, like something is wrong with you. But here's the truth most people don't understand. It's not about you. It's about alignment. Some relationships exist only because they fit the old version of you, the version that conformed, compromised, and sought approval. The moment you stop performing for validation, those relationships start to fade. And that fading is necessary because growth cannot coexist with complacency. Ambition cannot coexist with comfort. Vision cannot coexist with mediocrity. The people who remain after this filter are not there by accident. They are the ones who match your energy, respect your direction, and understand the courage it takes to grow. But the process is not easy. It demands patience, self-reflection, and the willingness to sit in discomfort. You must embrace silence, observe carefully, and stop seeking approval from anyone who cannot handle the truth of your evolution. Because here is the harsh reality. Most people will not celebrate your growth. They will question it. They will criticize it. They will even try to pull you back to where it feels safe for them. And if you let that affect you, you will waste years shrinking yourself to satisfy the wrong people. Instead, use the loneliness as a lens. See clearly who belongs in your life and who is only present out of habit. The friends who disappear when you start growing were never your allies. They were mirrors of comfort and conformity. And once you understand that, something shifts. Loneliness transforms from a void into a filter, a teacher, a catalyst for clarity. You no longer need the crowd to validate you. You no longer chase approval. You no longer compromise your time or energy for people who cannot match your ambition. And in that space, something incredible happens. You attract the right people. Not by trying, not by begging, not by performing, but because the strength you develop in solitude becomes magnetic. It draws the relationships, opportunities, and experiences that align with who you truly are and who you are becoming. Loneliness, then, is not the enemy. It is the doorway to a life of intentional, powerful connections. Here's the final truth you need to hear. Being alone is not a weakness. It is the proving ground for your life. Everything you have felt in silence, every moment of isolation, every gap in your circle is shaping you for something greater. You see, people fear being alone because it forces them to confront themselves. But the strongest people, the most successful people, the ones who leave a mark on the world, they do not avoid solitude, they embrace it. Because in that stillness, clarity emerges. You begin to see your purpose without distraction. You begin to hear your own thoughts without interference. You begin to distinguish between what matters and what is not, between relationships that lift you and those that drain you. And here is the most important lesson. The people who remain in your life after this process are not just friends, they are your tribe. They are people who respect your growth, your discipline, and your vision. People who celebrate your victories instead of resenting them. People who encourage you to keep going when the world doubts you. Every person who left was not a loss, they were a filter, a necessary clearing to make room for authenticity. Think about it like this: if you try to hold on to everyone, you dilute your energy, you water down your purpose, you settle for mediocrity. But when you let go of what no longer aligns, you create space. Space for the right relationships, the right opportunities, and the right life. And that is freedom. The freedom to live intentionally. The freedom to focus on your vision. The freedom to surround yourself only with people who match your values and respect your direction. Growth is lonely, but it is not lonely in vain. It is preparation. It is refinement. It is the fire that molds you into the person you were meant to become. And here's the final truth: the longer you embrace this solitude, the stronger you become. You become self-reliant, focused, and unshakable. You no longer need approval. You no longer fear rejection. And you no longer waste energy on distractions. Because you understand something that most people never will. Your life is not measured by the number of friends around you. It is measured by the impact you create, the value you bring, and the person you are becoming in the silence. So stand alone if you must, sit in the quiet. Face yourself. Grow relentlessly, because when the right people arrive, and they will not just walk into your life. They will walk in with respect, with purpose, and with the understanding that you are no longer the person you were. You are stronger, wiser, focused, and that is the power of being a man who has walked alone and risen anyway.